Hi Rock Kids, welcome back to Timeless Truth in the Beginning, where we're checking out the very first pages of Genesis to see God's timeless truth since the beginning of time and how we can use them for today. When we started, we looked at Genesis 1 and 2 and how God created everything around us in nature that we see. Everything God made should point to Him as God and as the boss of our lives. Our memory verse reminds us of this. It says in Romans 1:20, "For ever since the world was created, people have seen the earth and sky. Through everything God made, they can clearly see His invisible qualities, His eternal power and divine nature, so they have no excuse for not knowing God." Even though creation around us clearly shows us that there is a God, sin gets in the way of our relationship with God and it separates us from Him. We saw this last week in the fall of man when Adam and Eve chose to go their own way instead of God's way. That sin creeps in and it separates us from God and what He has for us. When we left Adam and Eve, they had been kicked out of the garden. They certainly felt the effects of sin then, but now years have gone by and they're still feeling the impact of sin. Even though in today's story, the choice to sin isn't from Adam and Eve, it's actually from one of their sons. Let's check it out. So Adam and Eve are kicked out of the garden in Genesis 3. The very first verses of chapter 4 talk about two of their sons who were born, Cain and Abel. It says in verse 2, when they grew up, Abel became a shepherd, while Cain cultivated the ground. And so it's really telling us about their jobs. Cain is a farmer and Abel raises sheep. Now, the time for the harvest comes, and Cain and Abel are supposed to bring an offering to God to show Him how thankful they are for Him. It's a way for them to worship God. It says, when it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. So they bring what they do for work to God as their offering, because that's what they have at this time. But did you hear the difference between Cain and Abel's offering? I'll read it one more time. When it was time for the harvest, Cain presented some of his crops as a gift to the Lord. Abel also brought a gift, the best portions of the firstborn lambs from his flock. So Abel brings God his very best lamb, and he gives that to God and then keeps the rest. Cain doesn't do that. He just brings God some of his crops, not the very best ones. And so their offerings are very different. Because of it, it says, the Lord accepted Abel and his gift, but He did not accept Cain and his gift. This made Cain very angry and he looked dejected. So God accepts Abel and his offering, but not Cain's. The book of Hebrews actually explains why this happens. It shows us that Abel's offering, Abel bringing his very best to God, is an outward showing of what's happening inside Abel's heart. God can tell from Abel's offering that his heart belongs to God, that he loves God, and that's why he's bringing God his very best. It's kind of like when we choose to get baptized. It's an outward showing of what's happening on the inside in our hearts already because we're followers of God. Abel bringing his best shows God that his heart belongs to Him. Now Cain bringing just some of his crops, that's not accepted by God because it's an outward showing of what's in his heart, which is that he doesn't love God most of all. He's not His follower, and it shows on the outside in his offering. Because of this, God doesn't accept his offering, and this makes Cain angry. And God knows it, and so He gives him a warning. It says, "Why are you so angry?" the Lord asked Cain. "Why do you look so dejected?" If you're wondering what that means, it means Cain was basically like pouting. And so God asks him why. He says, "You will be accepted if you do what is right. But if you refuse to do what is right, then watch out. Sin is crouching at the door, eager to control you. But you must subdue it and be its master." God gives this warning to Cain and basically says, Cain, you need to be careful here. Because of your anger, you're very tempted to sin. That means you want to do wrong. Thing is, Cain hasn't sinned yet. Not giving God his best wasn't a sin. Being angry because he wasn't accepted also wasn't Cain's sin. God is still warning him against sin. The Bible actually says, be angry and do not sin. Anger is just a feeling. It's what you choose to do with it. Do you choose to think only about that and get more angry, or act on it to hurt someone because of your anger? God warns him and says, Cain, because of this anger you have right now, sin is crouching at the door. Because remember, our enemy, Satan, is looking to trip up people so that they're separated from God. He wants us spiritually far from God. And so God says, look, you better watch out. Control this sin, or it's going to control you. We know from the rest of the story that Cain does not control his sin. He doesn't do anything about his anger. We know this because one day it boils over and he commits the very first murder. It says, one day Cain suggested to his brother, let's go out into the fields. And while they were in the field, Cain attacked his brother Abel and killed him. That day, Abel loses his life. Adam and Eve lose their son because of Cain's choice to sin. Cain is punished. God makes him a homeless wanderer. That means he doesn't get to stay there. He has to wander around without a home. He's no longer good at farming. God takes that gift away, and he has to struggle each and every day. That was the consequence for Cain's sin. But here's the thing. Even though Cain disobeyed God, God still loves Cain, and he still takes care of him, just like he did with Adam and Eve. God says that he'll protect Cain, that no one will be able to harm him. Imagine with me the people that exist in the world right now, like Adam and Eve, Cain's other siblings, nieces and nephews. Everyone else would have been so mad at Cain for what happened to Abel. So God is there to say, you know what? Nobody can harm you. This isn't going to go any further. He protects Cain, even though Cain had made the choice to sin against him. God also shows his grace and his love to Adam and Eve. It says in chapter 5, when Adam was 130 years old, he became the father of a son who was just like him. In his very image, he named his son Seth. After losing their son Abel, God gives them another son named Seth. This is a special son that is just like Adam, and it is the great grandson of Seth that we'll look at next week because he does some really awesome things. But for today, Cain's story reminds us of today's timeless truth. We must fight against temptation. Cain didn't fight it, even though God warned him that he needed to control it. God warns us too. He does it in the book of Peter. God said to us, stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Satan wants to trick us and trip us up so we're spiritually far from God because sin separates us from him. When you feel tempted and you want to sin, it's going to happen. When that temptation comes, don't ignore it like Cain did. Instead, you need to fight against it. Cain could have fought against his desire to sin by telling somebody how angry he was and choosing to think on other things, asking someone for help, not going into the field with Abel all alone because he was struggling. And he certainly should have stayed focused on God and what God said was right. He didn't do any of those things. He didn't try to fight it at all. For us, when temptation comes and we want to sin, we're looking at something that we know we shouldn't do and think, you know what, it looks pretty good. It's probably not that bad. We must stand strong and fight against temptation. That's our timeless truth for today. Here's the thing. God promises that when temptation comes, there will always be a way of escape, a way out so that you can actually do what is right instead. So when temptation comes and you're fighting against it, ask God for his help. He's already made a way of escape. Remember, from Cain's story, we must fight against temptation.